It's March 1st, 2020, and you're listening to the Beer Temple Podcast.
Remember, this is what we wanted. Remember, this is what we said. To never be heard or seen from again. Remember, this is what we wanted. Remember, this is what we said. To never be heard or seen from again.
Hello, and welcome to the Beer Temple Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Quinn, and I'm joined by my other host, Mike Siegel. What's up?
Not much.
We're in the Fox Room. It's a little boisterous today.
Yeah, the Dungeon and Dragon crowd is
questing
very hard.
Yeah, that's good, though.
Yeah,
that's
it's
fine.
good.
So
I encourage them.
Yeah, so it's I'm sure people can tell whether we're in Studio BT, aka the freezing cold
shipping
garage.
Receiving.
But
do you want to tell the people why we're not in Studio BT today?
It's packed with stuff.
Yeah,
it is full
with St. Patrick's Day.
Yes,
sets, right?
Yes,
yeah.
Yes.
You people out there drinking all your stouts on St. Patrick's Day.
Yes, Irish stouts. That's we're going to be talking about Irish stouts in just a bit because we're doing.
We are.
Yeah, we're doing a little bit of a special episode today, a deep dive, if you will. We're going to dip back into the hot take history because this is kind of the second and a half we did. We did a bit of one for Oktoberfest and Pumpkin. Then we did a really fun one with Pale Ale with Jude. Mm-hmm. And now we're going to do Stouts with Mr. Mike Siegel of Goose Island. What's up, man?
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for...
Good to see you guys.
Thanks for coming on, yeah.
Always love to talk a little history.
Yeah.
Aren't too many opportunities to.
No.
Anymore.
And it's one of the things that I think you and I have just kind of, I don't know, when given the opportunity, you and I seem to oblige one another and just kind of talk about that stuff. So that's kind of the idea. We'll get into that in just a moment. But first, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping and also just catching up with you guys, seeing what's been going on. But I want to on the just getting some stuff sorted out right off the bat. I want to thank WLPN 105.5 FM. I was we were on our holiday outing for the annual outing for
where the RB Dragons.
Yes,
yeah,
exactly. Way out to the suburbs for our annual Beer Temple outing, and on the way back, it was fitting because we were off the map. I mean, we were.
Yeah, did your cell phones work?
No. But on the way back, we turned on the radio, and we were starting to get towards the city, and I heard a song, and I was like, it was just the music, and I turned to Steven and said, "Is that the Never-Ending Story?" And it was the Never-Ending Story song. I'm like, who the hell is playing the Never-Ending Story song? And it was like, you're listening to 105.5 WLPN Lumpin' Radio. I was like, good old Lumpin' Radio.
We're back in civilization where the Lumpin' Radio tower can reach us.
Exactly.
Doesn't even make it to Rogers Park, but
right. But hey, they made it out. They made it out 290 or wherever we were going.
Very
94. Yeah. But so that was funny. Yeah, we went to art history. And we went to Penrose yesterday.
So you were pretty far out there. Geneva's pretty far.
Yeah, we were far out there. It was an hour out, and with traffic, it was like an hour and a half back.
Yeah.
And it was funny. We took the family minivan, piled the entire Beer Temple crew into the minivan, and the guys in the back. It's funny. I was kind of meant it as a joke because there's the television sets that are built into the seats.
Yeah. They're watching Moana or something.
Well, that's what's normally in there, but I put on, I brought Caddyshack in there.
Nice.
And you know what? The effect was identical. Total quiet. And I was like, this is amazing. This is exactly how it works with my kids. I put on a movie and they just like are quiet. I was half expecting to to turn around, look back, and see one of them, like off asleep and stuff like that. But
all rapt attention.
Yeah, exactly.
Watching Rodney Dangerfield do some of his best work.
Yes. But we had a great time, and we came back to the city and got some dinner and nightcaps at Hopleaf. So
Nice.
Yeah, it was a good time. What have you been up to? Anything?
Not too much. Yeah, basically, we're on a 4-week beer cycle, so there's nothing really new to say.
Right.
But trying to improve process. In between, I try to
it.
get a little bit better at actually packaging the beer every time. So
Got
trying
it.
to figure out ways to continually fight oxygen ingress in our packaging process.
Okay.
Yeah,
I was talking to Tom Corder at former Goose Island lad out in Penrose, and he was talking about some of the issues he'd been having with bottling in the past, and he found that, oddly enough, when he was filling his bottles, when he started doing a gravity feed versus counter pressure, it improved. And for him, he says, because they were bottle conditioning in that sense, and then you get a lot of oxygen scavenge, and he said it worked very well for him. But
Yeah.
I don't really know anything other than what I heard him say just yesterday.
Yeah. There's a lot to it. I don't know if it's actually that interesting, but
No.
you can't just it doesn't scavenge as much oxygen as you would like it to sometimes.
Right.
And it's probably things that are only really perceptible to me most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
But when you taste these beers, as I often do, too early, and then at the right time, and then a little bit later, there's little things that fall off.
Mm-hmm.
Beers are mostly the same, but as someone who wants them to be exactly right all the time, trying to figure out ways to do that a little bit better.
Okay. Cool. How about you, Mike? Anything new with you? What's going on with you? You haven't been on in a bit.
Well, work-wise, we're knocking out a bunch of small barrel-aged projects this quarter. We kind of found some wheat wine casks that never got
Gotta love it.
never got extracted. And
So how old is that now?
it's about 2.25 years old.
Oh, that sounds
And it's
awesome.
tasting amazing. I think this beer's taken. So this wheat wine has no specialty malts. It's malted wheat and 2-row. So it's like
So cool.
30% wheat. And coming out of
Lambic.
the boil, it's a medium amber. And then picks up a little bit of color at kind of 8 months, but this stuff was dark brown
Cool.
at 2.25 years, and it picked up so much barrel,
Yeah.
and it
Yeah, I can
just
imagine.
was divine. So we're doing one as a cuvee, which was a blend of, let's see, rack my brain here, Heaven Hill and Buffalo Trace barrels, and then 2 other releases, one with applewood honeycombs, kind of like what we did with cherrywood, but doing toasted applewood, which we felt was more resonant with that beer.
For sure.
Subtle in the same way that cherrywood was. I think it's actually a little bit more expressive, but still subtle. And then we did another one that's kind of a fun idea that goes back to probably 3 years ago, which was peaches and vanilla, kind of like a peaches and cream kind of fun take. So all 3 work really, really well, and those will be released in bottles. So we're still doing bottles for some things, 500 ml bottles. And then we've got a collaboration with Microphone coming out a little later this, probably in April, I think.
That's cool.
So we're doing a couple of barrel-aged releases.
Oh, cool.
We might be the last 2 breweries doing only 500 ml bottles.
Yeah.
Same scale, basically.
Yeah.
I love the 500 ml bottle. I mean, obviously we did the 750 for a long time, and that tailed off, but the 500 ml is great.
Yeah,
I
it's
really,
perfect.
really love it.
Yeah, it's perfect.
So, yeah, just some fun barrel-aged projects in kind of non-BCS season, and
Right.
amongst all the other chaos, we're getting ready for St. Patty's Day like everybody else, and we do this fun taproom-only version of Bourbon County Stout called Shamrock Stout, which is mint, cocoa nibs, lactose, vanilla, kind of the Shamrock,
Pastry stout,
the Shamrock Shake. We even get
Yes.
the green and white straws, and
Oh, nice.
literally a couple of years ago, again, we've been probably doing this 5 straight years in the tap room only, draft only, just for the week, and they'll do custom crowler labels and all that. There was one guy who was literally packing up a USPS. I think I may have told you guys the story last time. He's like packing up the crowler in a USPS box, like taping it shut in the tap room, like unapologetically, just like ready to ship this out to like somebody else. So that's what I expect. People love people love it.
You know?
Yeah, that's
So
cool.
fun stuff like that too.
Are you guys should get one of those ice cream machines this year and make like actual.
There you go.
But then it will probably break.
I think they actually did floats, just with the straws, the kind of like a root beer float,
stout floats.
Stout float.
Never done that, but
You've never done that?
a stout float. I've done a root beer float.
You've never had a beer float?
Never.
That's kind of crazy to me.
I mean, is it going to be better than a root beer float?
No.
Yeah, then just do a root beer float. Root beer floats are
But it's
very
going to
good.
be better than whatever beer you drink because now there's ice cream in it and it tastes more like candy.
True. A lot of this is all going to come back too, because we're talking about stouts.
Yeah.
Which is it starts off in the old Mars Candy Factory is where the style was invented. No,
You got your stout in my peanut butter.
just what? You got your peanut butter in my stout. Very quickly, just curious if anyone's had any beers lately that they've enjoyed. Haven't done that in a bit. And then there's one last thing. We've been getting a lot of now we have 2 handwritten letters and several electronic letters, and we're gonna get to those. Yeah. Well, we have to get to some of those letters for sure. So thank you guys. And it's if you want to send us an electronic version of a letter, then that would go to insiders@craftbeertemple.com. If you want to send us an actual letter, it is in the show notes, but it's 3173 North Elston, Elston Avenue in Chicago, 60618. And just send it to the Beer Temple or to Mike. I think this latest one might have come to you. Ooh. I forget.
All right.
But none of that. I want to. We haven't read a review in a long time.
Ooh.
I mean, years.
Yeah, we delete the bad ones so you can't read those.
So, I haven't looked at the reviews in a long time, and I figured we should do one because why not?
Why not?
So I just fired up.
Randomly pick a review.
Let's just pick the most recent one. Apple Podcasts. All right, just from 2/19/2022, just a couple days ago. A little more than a couple, but the Perfect Beer Podcast. 3 bottle caps. It's the Allagash White of pods. And then that was by Mets Fan 6, and he did give us 3 stars.
Mets Fan 6. All right,
well done,
thanks, bud.
Mets Fan 6. You got an LOL, at least out of me. And
you got a big old real LOL out of me when Serge said that to us.
Yeah, Serge found that one, Fade Master. And the Perfect Beer Podcast, 3 bottle caps. Oh, very, very good. Very, very happy with that one.
That's probably true, though, right? Like, if you are to graft the thinking about Untapped onto podcasts, like True Crime is the pastry stout or the hazy IPA, right? That's what people are listening to.
Yeah.
Maybe politics, and beer is like the lager, where you got to really like it to listen to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but we do have some. I mean, the one before that says "Beer is dead, dust is dead." bring back Talkin' Strami.
We do need to bring back Talkin' Strami.
Yeah, well, there's still plenty of time.
That's true.
So I just wanted to thank.
It's more of a Phobab related.
Mets fan. Wait, you're a Mets fan, aren't you? No, you're a Yankees
fan. Yeah,
that's right.
Never. My best friend growing up was a Mets fan, though.
That's a cool story. You want to go into that?
Yeah, his name's Andrew. He lives in Connecticut still.
This is all going to be edited.
2 beautiful children. They're also probably going to be Mets fans.
Okay, and an hour later. Oh, that was a great story, Mike.
I rooted for the Mets in the '86 series.
Yeah. Dow Strawberry.
One and only time.
I would have too.
Yeah.
Who are they?
The Red Sox.
Oh,
that's the Bill Buckner series.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
Yep.
I was a young lad, but that's the first World Series that I actually remember watching.
Yeah.
That was a crazy team.
But yeah, they were all coked up. And
Well, if you're following baseball, not a lot has changed.
Right.
Matt Harvey is on the Mets. There's we don't need to go into that.
Yeah, let's not. Yeah.
After pod.
But what we're going to talk about is the history of stouts. We're doing a hot take history, meaning, I think Mike especially.
Which Mike?
Siegel.
Mike S?
Yes. Yeah, Mike S.
Yeah.
knows what he's talking about. But, we are not actual historians to the best of our ability. All this stuff is true. But then as we start getting into more recent stuff, we're just going to be going with kind of our takes on stuff, our feelings for how stuff have gone.
Yeah.
But really fascinating. Mike and I sat down about a month ago, I think, and talked about some of the stuff about what we were going to be discussing. And I think you're in for a treat, Mike.
Yeah.
Mike S.
I am. I'm.
Yeah.
I'll play the audience where if there's something I don't understand, I'll be like, wait, what?
What?
Which will happen a lot. I'm not very smart.
Yeah. So what I'm going to ask is just to take a very brief break, Serge. I just want to grab a glass of water, frankly. I'm still dehydrated from yesterday, to tell you the truth. So I need to drink some water.
All right.
I'm going to get a glass of water, if that's cool, and then we'll start up with the hot take history. All right. We're back with hot take history on the Beer Temple podcast, and just like we did with the Pale Ale episode, I think we should start from the very beginning, Mike. I think we should just talk about where and when a stout was invented and from whence it came. So, you want to talk a little bit about the early beginnings of
Yeah,
of
and
stout?
with the hot take disclaimer that I referenced Martin Cornell and Ron Pattinson
which is what I did
for just about everything.
They're
And
both
then-
big fans of the show. So.
And I also, for the first time in a long time, dug into Ray Daniels' Design Great Beers, and there's a lot of really good history in that too, which
Great
I
book.
totally forgot. Just on top of recipe design, there's a lot of really well-researched history in that too. So, I think for anyone that's interested in stout history or any of the classic beer style history, go to Ron, certainly for European history, Ron and Martin. But Designing Great Beers also has a ton of great history. So, but going back, I think you and I talked about this a little bit with stout. You got to start with porter, right?
Yeah.
Porter had its origins in London breweries. It was the first industrially produced beer. The Industrial Revolution, the steam engine, it all was created in and started in England, and so English breweries, London breweries, were making porter at a scale that was an order of magnitude greater than Europe. When you're talking about even in Germany, kind of brew pubs size production facilities, when London was making hundreds of thousands of barrels a year, they were off to a huge head start.
And also the technology, a huge technological head start as well.
Yeah.
Way ahead of anybody else.
So this is
Germans,
porter,
yeah.
and so stout being birthed of porter. But if we start with the stout just meaning
Sturdy,
strong,
robust.
the strongest, and there's a lot of references in the 17th century, 18th century of strong porter and stout just being interchangeably used.
And I've read that even the term, stout was often called stout porter.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there'll be some cheeky folks that'll reference like pale stout. Pale stout was actually a thing, probably from what I saw, going back to like the 18th century. Because again, stout just meant strong. So it wasn't associated with dark beers or even dark porter. But I think for the context of what we're talking about brown stout or brown stout porter, as it was called, and kind of the derivatives thereof. So porter being not only the first industrially produced beer, so produced at a very, very large scale relative to any other style of beer or breweries outside of England, but because of the British Navy, it traveled all over the globe. So it was the kind of the first global sensation as well, porter beer.
Yeah, absolutely.
So porter being a blend of, originally all brown malt, just talking about grist, and then it kind of found a place at being pale, brown, and black for a good long stretch of time. And you got to remember, porter was the beer of the day from about 1720 to 1860.
Yes.
It's a pretty good run.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a pretty solid run.
global.
Take that, hazy.
A global style for sure. Just
About the same as Brute IPA, I would say.
Yeah, I'd say.
Yeah.
I'd say those are
in seconds.
Yeah.
Yeah. So porter was the kind of global style. Stout was an offshoot of it. And it essentially meant just the strongest. And Mike, you were telling me something very interesting about the history of the term imperial. Is now kind of where that term starts becoming a thing as well, or is that later in stouts?
Well,
history?
I think that's an interesting. So porter breweries, again, stout meant the strongest, the strongest porter, but they would typically just make one porter, but they would make a range of stouts. So you'd have oftentimes single, double, triple, and then imperial stout. Imperial being the biggest of the stouts.
Right.
So, and then you'd have export. I've got it here on some of my notes. They'd have. It would be typical for a brewery to have single, double, triple, imperial, and then a keeping and running. So keeping meaning aged in wood vessels, running meaning fresh, and then you'd have an export style. So you could have 9, 10 different
it's
stouts
amazing.
coming out of one brewery.
Right, and a single porter.
Yeah,
is
and
funny.
this is the 19th century, just for context. We're going to go through different eras,
Yeah.
and some things will kind of quickly change. Some things will hang on for and kind of be legacy notes. But
Well, just funny for context for that, like we make fun of breweries for having a bunch of the same IPA right now, and it seems like that it might be more that's how it's always been, that there's 7 different stouts coming out of or porters coming out of the same brewery, where there's 7 different IPAs coming out of breweries now.
and that's a great point, because I think as we go through this, we'll see how many things that are contemporary are whether they intend to or not, are referencing back to something that was done 150, 200 years ago.
Yeah.
Everything old is new again, right?
Yeah.
Whether that's a sweet profile or a dry profile, or kind of how those, the prevailing trends of taste change over time.
And I always thought that the term imperial came about from the Russian imperial stout. The lore of the Russian court, and I don't know if the timing is quite right. It's probably close to right. Where these stouts were being sent, export stouts being sent over to Russia, but the term imperial predates that. So
It just meant our biggest.
yeah,
Whereas-
and they're not synonymous. So the Russian imperial stout was it was I guess an add-on, but the imperial stout.
We'll get into the whole.
Yeah.
We got a whole category in imperial stout, but yes, breweries didn't start marketing because of conflicts between England and Russia in the mid 19th century. Brewers would not have wanted to reference Russian imperial stout in 19th century England. It would not be a good selling point. Probably like it
we're
is
back
now.
again, baby.
Probably like it is now, unfortunately. So Russian stout and then Russian imperial stout or imperial Russian stout isn't used as a marketing term until the 20th century,
Right.
by English breweries.
And this is, you said, the 19th century, and I remember you telling me that for most of the 19th century, there was a law in England saying that you could not use adjuncts as well.
So
Or unless we're jumping ahead too much.
well, I mean, I think there's a lot of ground to cover. I've got a lot.
Go for it.
I got a lot of paperwork here, and I don't want to just have my nose in the paperwork. But so we covered porter in how essentially how stout was born of porter. The grists were very much the same, almost identical in a lot of cases between porter and stout. It was just I don't know if you guys know the term party guile. So I think Fuller's may still be party guiling. Well, you essentially take one big mash and run off to different coppers. And so it's like Derek, who I've worked with, Derek Prentice over in London, would say it's like making like a strong pot of tea. You pour off that initial bit of tea and it's very strong, and then you can keep steeping water back into it and make a weaker tea. And it's like, that's how brewers were making different. They would take, and even I think Fuller's ESB and London Pride are the same mash, but then they'll run off the wort, the stronger wort ESB, of course, and then the weaker wort being Pride, hop them differently, of course, but they go to different kettles. So breweries were set up to have a series of kettles, or coppers, as they call them. We call them kettles, and take one mash and run into different. Now, party guiling, U.S. home brewing kind of has a little bit of a different meaning, similar but different in production in England. So that's important for context, at least for me. Brown malt was prominently involved for a long time in English brewing, so it kind of that kind of roasty, acrid character. And this as we get into Irish brewers really didn't have a taste for brown malt, and that's how Guinness and other Irish breweries kind of got away from brown malt right away, and they worked their way towards roasted malt and roasted barley. But
what were you going to say, Mike, about brown malt, or no? Nothing.
Just because it was the only way to make malt at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Right. So porters and thus stouts were 100% brown malt until whatever period of time, the early 19th century, and then you start to see more when they realized pale malt got them so much more extract.
Right.
And then the hallmark moment is, so what you're referencing is 1816. This is English law. All forms of coloring beer were made illegal. This is caramel sugar. Again, caramel sugar was commonly used as a coloring agent and some degree a flavoring agent for porter breweries. So in 1816, law in England, you can no longer. It's English Reinheitsgebot is put into place in 1816. What happens the next year? Coffee roaster Daniel Wheeler invents black patent malt. So he's actually roasting malt like coffee and patents it, which is why we call it black patent malt. And this allows for the first true black beer.
Yeah.
Whereas previously you're, again, 100% brown, or you're pale and brown and amber. So black malt allows, and this is one of those dates that you say, okay, this is where true stout begins,
because you could get that black.
You could get the black, and you got away from brown. You could start to get away from brown malt. English breweries, London breweries in particular, really embraced brown malt for a good long time. But as we will get into, Irish breweries really got. I think Guinness, I got it in here somewhere. Really got rid of brown malt by like the 1820s, something like that. Which again had a lot of that smoky, acrid character.
As soon as they possibly could, and I think they did it for economic reasons. Yeah, because he was smart. Arthur Guinness, or whoever the Guinness was at that point, was a smart person and realized that you could use less malt to get the same amount of extract
and color,
and then you could get your color and your roast flavor from small amounts of specialty malt that was highly roasted.
Very dark.
I think it's interesting. It's important to think about these things as technology, right? These things are like what we think of now as like, oh my God, I can like now send an email. Like it's not clearly not quite the same global impact, but you couldn't make things like that before. It's so taken for granted now that the way you build a beer recipe is mostly pale malt and then a couple other things. But going from all brown malt to being like mostly pale malt, which is more efficient, and a little bit of darker colored malt is a huge innovation in a legitimate way.
We talked about that a little bit with the pale ale episode, but people come in, when I'm talking to people about beer or giving little classes and stuff, people do ask about hops and why, beer always didn't taste like, why didn't they like all these like juicy flavors before? And it's like, yeah, those hops did not exist.
Yeah.
And again, it's thought of as thinking of it as a technology is not a bad way to put it. But getting back to what you were saying, Mike, so we've got the black patent malt, huge, changed all of beer forever. This ability to use, and from then on, well, shortly after, but eventually, you have all beer is predominantly going to be pale malt. But before that, it was this, brown malt. Which is brown malt even like a thing, except in very special? I mean, can you buy brown malt anymore
these days? Yeah, but it's a drum roasted, very homogeneous. Like when we did Obadiah Poundage, we had Andrea Stanley out in Valley Malt do it the old-fashioned way, which is finishing it over a hornbeam fire, very hot, burning hardwood. And so I think I described it to you guys when we did the last podcast. If that brown malt, and I think it was fairly representative of how they would make it in the mid-19th century. You get a handful of that, and you'd have everything from probably 5 to 500 Lovibond in your hand. plus smoke malt. So you'd have pale malt, you'd have Munich malt, you'd have some caramelization, you've had some chocolate, you'd have some dark roasted, you'd have some. It's like having 5 or 6 different malts in one. That was how brown malt used to be. Very complex, but it was also a cheap malt for London breweries. These are breweries just like the big breweries these days. Economies of scale. Brown malt was cheap, and then when they realized pale malt was greater extract, they started moving to pale malt.
Especially because they were getting taxed by the size of the thing they were getting, right? The size of the package of the malt. Wasn't that
taxation has changed in England, and it's probably, and Ron will say this. So again, it's not necessarily me, but taxation and legislation, particularly in England, it does more to change beer styles, and of course, world wars,
right?
Affecting gravities and supplies and whatnot. So these major things changed styles more than like brewers just being, I want to try something new.
Right, it wasn't an artistic pursuit then.
Exactly.
But I think it is important to point out that they were being taxed on the ingredients they were buying, right? More so than the output of beer they were making.
Yeah, and I've got it in my notes here. It changed. At various points, they'd be taxed by either the ingredients or the gravity.
Yeah.
And I don't know specifically. I'll find it here somewhere. But at various points, you'd be taxed sometimes on just the gravity of your wort and other times on the ingredients.
Right. So just for context for people, like what drove these decision-making? Like if you had to buy 10 pounds of malt that made you 10 Plato beer or 10 pounds of malt that could make you 40 Plato beer, you're getting taxed the same at the beginning of when this was happening.
And so 1820, certainly into the 1850, stout and porter recipes start to divide
Separate,
and be different. And this is where stout and porter start to. And porter, as I mentioned, had a great run, 1720 to 1860. And this is, in porter was just like 100% brown malt originally. It was 100% aged beer, and it kind of went from, in the ratios, like when we did Obadiah Poundage, which was 1840 recreation, it was 1/3 aged beer, aged for a year. So 2/3 fresh beer, that running beer, and 1/3 keeping beer, like 12-month-old fooder aged, vat aged with Brettanomyces. And by the end of porter, I think just the aged taste, or the English taste, as they would call it, just fell out of favor. Certainly by the end of the 20th century, Brettanomyces, that was in stock ales and old ales of England, people were really enjoying fresh pale ales, the unaged beer. And I think the aged taste just fell out of favor in England by the end of I think I said beginning of the 20th century, end of the 19th century.
And you were saying, again, I think, Guinness is such an interesting brewery because it's the closest thing to a modern day, brewery that was around during that time and still maybe has some, vestigial tales of some of these practices, one of which ended, probably at this point 50, 60, 70 years ago, but the fooders, right? There are still decommissioned giant fooders at the Guinness brewery that presumably they used to age beer in to blend into their stout.
Oh, yeah. Guinness is, we could spend a whole podcast talking about Guinness, and if anybody's curious about Guinness history, there's a great book, hard to find. It's out of print, but I found a copy used on Amazon called A Bottle of Guinness, Please, by David Hughes. And he was a brewer that worked for Guinness for the Park Royal Brewery when they had a London brewery. And he gets into all the details that Guinness doesn't want you to know, because they're a very secretive brewery. Great folks there. I know a bunch of folks at Guinness, and they're great individuals, but they're tight-lipped when it comes to certain things. And this guy it's a tell-all book.
Okay, that's cool. But they had those fooders, right?
Before an extra stout was entirely an aged beer. It was a vat aged beer for 12 to 24 months. So yeah, we can get into. You want to get into Guinness now, or we're
either going to get into Guinness, or we're going to get into kind of the repeal of the adjunct law. Where do you want to go?
Well, so the way it works in my head is like let's follow up through kind of English history, and then we can separate it into English and Irish, because I think there are some key separations. But of course, people are going to know Guinness, and they can buy a bottle of For an Extra Stout and kind of reference what it tastes like today. Porter ends 1860. Let's say stout takes off. Interesting. we talk about these days with hazies and pastry stouts and kind of this taste for sweet. A lot of Chicago brewers, we call it the Chicago sweet tooth. Well, 1880s England, the sweet stout era begins. And you start to see and I don't have enough context to know exactly why, what this was, if this was kind of trying to balance out beers that were like really dry and they wanted to bring back a sweeter profile. But I guess we don't have to stretch too far to know, just like from today, like people like sweet things, and they started to adopt a taste for sweeter beers. So 1880s England.
And that was in conjunction with this no coloring, no additives, this Reinheitsgebot is gone now, right? So
well,
right around that same time.
Yeah, so the, what is it, I think it's about 1880, what they call the Free Mash Tun Act.
Yes.
And it essentially undid that English Reinheitsgebot. And because Ron says breweries could have their brewing equipment confiscated by the government if they were using adjuncts.
Like oats.
Yeah, so 1880 is another one of those dates, the Free Mash Tun Act, where this allowed for the introduction of roasted barley, which of course, Guinness took off with, as opposed to roasted malt, and then of course your oats, sugar. So sugar and the references I saw made a lot of references to Egyptian sugar. They were using up to 20% sugar.
What's Egyptian sugar?
That's just what they referenced. It probably was. I don't think it's anything. Maybe it was just the source of sugar for the late 19th century. But brewers started chucking in a lot of sugar, probably a lot of caramelized sugar.
Cheaper source of fermentables, right?
And the sweet stout era began. And then you've got the derivatives oatmeal stout,
yes,
which was a patented, very popular. This was who first made oatmeal stout? That was Maclay. It was a Scottish brewery, 1890s. So again, very contemporary. I mean, oatmeal stouts aren't necessarily all the rage.
Something different, right? Wasn't it called something?
They were. Yeah, that's a good call out. They were called oat. It was a oat malt stout. Yes. It was the first stout with oats, and it used about 30% malted oats, and it really became very popular. They were so proud of it that they actually placed advertisements in large papers all over England, like we got this oat malt stout, and it was very, very. They patented it, and so other brewers wanted to get in on this, but they used flaked oats to get around, I guess, the patent on using malted oats, and they called it oatmeal stout. So actually, the first one that introduced it is the lesser known name. That it's of course the one that was copied and replicated became what we reference.
The more generic style,
oatmeal stout.
Cool.
And oatmeal stouts, of course, continue to this day. And then the other one, as far as like just the kind of the lineage, and then going into the derivatives, is milk stout. So adding in lactose. Again, I think this was a response to the sweeter taste and getting something that was more stable and wouldn't ferment out. So
and this was considered the sweet stout era, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So
as it was called, the sweet stout era.
What time are we talking about these days?
It sounds like right after this English Reinheitsgebot, the Free Mash Tun Act ended. Right around that time, these other things started.
80s,
I think. Yeah.
Yeah. The milk stout was invented in 1908. So a little bit after that, but you're talking about a pretty good run of a few decades of a sweeter stout profile.
Yeah. So you had all that stuff kind of coming roughly within the same, I don't know, several decades of the oatmeal stout, the lactose, the milk stout / sweet stout, black patent malt. All that was kind of coming together, and you started to have people making different types of stouts. So it was branching out and becoming, at that point, was stout more popular than porter in the early 1900s then? Yes,
and I think by the end of World War II, porter was just non-existent in
non-existent.
In England.
Yeah, like dead.
And if you saw a reference to it, it would be like, so stout was still quite popular in London, but porter was just, it was, instead of being the kind of the father of stout, it was known as just a kind of a weaker sibling of stout, and most people didn't really know what it was anymore. So porter just died away. Certainly by the mid 20th century in England, it was pretty much gone.
Yeah, gone. Yeah. So then where do we go from there? Do we go to Ireland at this point?
Yeah, Ireland is kind of it breaks off somewhere, again, around that black patent malt invention, or the Daniel Wheeler's invention of, because the Guinness was very early to adapt the recipes from brown malt. And I saw references to Irish brewers just had a lot of disdain for brown malt and the kind of probably the smoky, acrid character of it. So they didn't have a taste for it, and they really adopted roasted malt. Again, roasted barley wasn't legal until, about 1880, the Free Mash Tun Act. So these days you talk about Irish stout, you always talk about roasted barley. But, of course, for that good stretch of the 19th century, it was roasted malt.
What is the substantial difference for people who don't really know?
Roasted barley's cheaper. I think if you think about, like, again, economy of scale, it's not malted before. It's just roasting barley, whereas you, again, not going through the malting process. So it's a cheaper product fundamentally if you're looking at it purely from a big brewery. And Guinness by the certainly by the 1880s, around that Free Mash Tun era, is the biggest brewery in the world at that point. Whereas the London breweries, the Barclay Perkins and Truman's, all had their era of being the biggest brewery in the world earlier in the 19th century. So these are all the big breweries. Thinking about, we think of things as, as craft brewers or as artisans, whatever you want to call us, as like that pursuit of great flavor and the best ingredients and at no, spare no expense. And these brewers were closer to modern day big breweries, where it's let's make things at let's make a product at a large scale, get it out, and try to exactly, in a lot of cases. And so Guinness takes a few different paths. Of course, Guinness Stout, which a lot of people are going to be drinking here across the city over the next couple weeks, really only goes back to about 60 years.
Yep,
like that version of the beer we know as Guinness is only about 60 years old.
And it's
nitrogenated draft
technical,
Guinness.
Another technology advancement, which was nitrogenating beer, also invented by Guinness in an attempt to stabilize the drinking experience for the consumer, who had before that been drinking cask beer, and Guinness got tired of publicans screwing up the beer and people being angry at Guinness because the Guinness tasted so bad, and it kind of rubbing off on them. And they're saying, how can we just have this kind of closed system where we can keep it out of the hands of these idiots and just make sure that they're pouring the beer the way we want them to? And they invented nitrogenation to mimic cask beer, which I think a lot of people don't.
There is a video. You'll got to do a little bit of searching, but I don't know if you guys have seen this video. It's a BBC video. It's taken in Belfast. So it's a reporter in a pub, 1973, and this is
my wheelhouse right now. Let's load up the YouTube machine.
It's a fantastic video. It's the only one of its kind that I'm aware of. So it's 1973, Belfast, a reporter for the BBC reporting on the last brew of Guinness Porter. So this is the last. So Porter, as we mentioned, in London was long gone by this period. But in Ireland, and particularly Northern Ireland, there was still a taste for kind of a lower strength. That lower strength porter is just kind of the everyday drinking beer. But eventually it had its day. So in 1973, Guinness brewed the last batch. And this video, of course, it's that hallmark date. We're in the pub. Well, they've got video of the two cask system. They had what they call a high and low cask. And the best way I can describe it is they'd have a cask that was under extremely high pressure and one that was under low pressure. And you'd see the publican. You see this in the video. He takes a big old pint of one and he fills it up, and it's almost all foam. He fills the whole thing with foam, and he sets it over there to settle. Okay. Then he comes back to it, and he goes to the low pressure one and fills up kind of from the bottom. You see the black porter kind of fill it up, and you're left with that classic Guinness head at the top. And it looks like a pint of Guinness today, but he pours it entirely from these two vessels. And I think this was kind of the end of that era of I think the Guinness Porter was done in cask this way. Guinness Draft hadn't been invented at this point, but I believe that's what they were trying to reproduce with Guinness Draft is this, and it's kind of shooting out of the cask, and you could truly get the sense that a publican had to have some knowledge of what he was doing. And I think this goes to, like, you guys have been to Dublin. I think it's like you hear it to this day, like that pub's got the best pint, and this pub's got the best pint. These days, it's all the same pasteurized, homogeneous Guinness.
Yeah.
And I really like Guinness, but all the pints are more or less the same. Guinness themselves go around, clean all the lines. But there's this, these older guys will still say, "This is the best Guinness in town. That's the best Guinness over here." You know, Jimmy
It's probably just cultural that's what their fathers were saying.
But I think it goes back
then.
to a time before the current Guinness where it really required, like, the actual person serving the beer needed to do a little bit of a dance and kind of get the balance
I gotta
right.
watch that video.
So
I gotta
I don't have a name for the video, but if you look up, Guinness Porter in 1973, you should be able to find it. It's a
find it, put a link in the bio,
tremendous
show
video.
notes if we can find it.
Yeah, we should.
But going back earlier, Guinness, so these days, of course, we know Guinness Draft, but it's it's a more modern thing. So Foreign Extra Stout, the beer that many people that come to your shop would know is started out like 220 years ago.
It's their oldest beer by far.
Yeah, as a beer made for the West Indies.
Yeah.
And so Guinness was making porter, was making stout, and they were aging beer in big old vats for a year and a half, developing certainly some lactic acidity.
Yeah.
There's a lot. That book, you'd love this book, the Bottle of Guinness, please, because he gets into all the dirty secrets or the dirty history of Guinness. They had like a big acidification problem in like the 1920s where things kind of got out of control. Got pre-pasteurization and all that.
Like some breweries.
Yeah. Guinness used to send, so before, they would, we think of these days as breweries brewing beer and then bottling or canning all in their own facility. But it was common for the big brewers then to ship their beer out to separate bottling facilities. So both Guinness and Bass did not bottle their own beer; they would ship it out. Even to this day, Dublin ships they only keg it in Dublin. They actually ship it to Liverpool or to Belfast to be canned.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Crazy.
Which is crazy. These are weird footnotes that only my brain hangs on to.
Yeah, right.
That's what the show's about, baby.
But it is interesting. And
but Foreign Extra Stout really goes back 220 years, highly hopped. Again, these days they won't tell you how they make it. The Bottle of Guinness, please, will get into some of the details. Essentially, as they advance through, again, technological developments and realizing we don't need to vat age this beer for 15 months. And Guinness was starting to brew in Nigeria, and they were getting very popular in Africa. They had to figure out a way, like, how do we get that Guinness flavor in different breweries across the world?
That essence of Guinness that you hear them talk about.
Yeah,
that they ship out everywhere.
Kaiser did a great podcast on Guinness a couple years ago. It was like a 4-part. Michael Kaiser, Good Beer Hunting. He went over there and did a deep dive, and he kind of gets them to tell a few details that maybe they didn't want to reveal. So great podcast there. But essentially, they created through, I think, evaporation, they would take this aged beer and make a concentrate.
Yeah.
And you could actually you could ship it to Nigeria and put it into a pale beer and make Guinness Stout.
Right.
So I think these days, I'm speculating here, this is the real hot take, but
absolutely.
These days they're blending in either some lactic acid or doing something. To create.
Because there is that little hint.
They will say, Guinness brewers will say lactic acid does play a role in Guinness Stout, but they won't reveal exactly how they.
It's what makes that stout, that Irish stout, different than essentially all the others. Even Murphy's and Beamish. I mean, they don't have that sharpness, just slightly there. And it is also interesting that the use of roasted barley, unmalted barley in Ireland, being such a big thing, that goes throughout. That's what Irish stout is kind of famous for. Also, what Irish whiskey is famous for. So it would make sense, that the whiskey is essentially the distilled beer. That they would both be known for this kind of unmalted barley. Probably because it's, I would imagine, cheaper. And I don't know if I always, when you're dealing with Ireland, I'm always curious if it has something to do with the English. If they didn't want to buy malt from the English or something.
Being oppressed by the English for quite some time. So there's, I saw some Guinness recipes, and you're talking about like 95% pale malt, 5% roasted barley.
Wow.
And they still roast their own barley at Guinness. So I don't think a lot of people know that. They actually got a little bit of it. It's really dark stew. It's like 660 Lovibond roasted barley, so really, really dark stuff. But they can get away with using a smaller percentage of it. They roast their own barley. They got a little fireman on duty right there at all times. But I certainly didn't know that. They've got vats, but they've been decommissioned.
You've seen them, right? You've seen the vats.
The vats are still there. They're quite large. And it's just kind of a storage room now. But they were decommissioned about like the 1960s. Like we're right around the time that Guinness Draft came online in 1959. They really ceased doing any wood aging. Fascinating brewery, though. I mean, again, we could talk a whole episode on Guinness, and I love it. I love Guinness. The one thing that drives me a little bit nuts about them is their specialty releases. They've got a minimum diacetyl specification for like for an extra stout, and the Antwerp and all that. And I talked to them about it. I go, why do you have a 500 ppb minimum, which is a lot for those that aren't aware of an analytical diacetyl. It's quite high, and if you're sensitive, you'll pick it up. And they just said that we think that diacetyl has played a role in stout historically, and I really disagree. At least my palate disagrees. But
we had a foreign extra opened, and you definitely pick up on it. Yeah, I mean, you picked up on it. We had a Sam Smith too, and it was in there as well. I mean, so maybe they're right. There is definitely just a little bit of diacetyl. It does not tend to bother me in stouts. In lighter beers, it drives me banana. I mean, even in like a bitter or something like that, I can't do it. But for whatever reason, in a stout, a little bit
mild
doesn't. I don't know. I'll let you know. Probably not. I don't think I would
ever.
Don't think I'd have. I don't think I'd enjoy it in a mild.
Ever had a mild?
I've had one or two.
Nice.
I haven't before.
And the last note on Guinness, 1894 was the first use of roasted barley. Again, roasted barley, I just mentioned that because I think that's what most brewers think of when they think of like, we're going to make a Irish stout or dry Irish stout, roasted barley, and they first used it 1894. And again, we talked about modern day Guinness. There's been lots of books and stories told on that beer, so we don't need to go into too much detail there. The only other subcategory I had was maybe the one most relevant today is Imperial Stout.
Yeah. So talk about that. Talk about Imperial Stout and Russian Imperial Stout, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So Imperial Stout, as we mentioned, Russian Imperial Stout wasn't used until the 20th century. I mentioned that. Imperial Stout just meant our biggest. They were making weak stouts, mid-strength stouts, strong stouts, and then Imperial Stouts were just the biggest of those stouts. Of course, porter breweries were exporting the beer to Russia. Catherine the Great had a taste for it, allegedly.
Which apparently is true, right?
From what I could tell, a lot of those myths are true, or so-called myths are true, that at least a lot of beer was being exported to St. Petersburg. That's undeniable. There's records on that.
And they like that Imperial Stout.
They like the big beer. And in 1822, the Russian government blocked almost all articles of British manufacture except porter. And Ron speculates that's just even though they were making porter-ish beer
in Russia,
they just couldn't reproduce the quality that the London breweries were making. And then there was a lot of, speaking of mythologies, there was a lot of mythology over you can only make porter with Thames water, and all this stuff. So there was people reference London Porter, and that was the only place that really could make true porter. So the Russians loved the porter so much that they banned almost everything from England except for porter.
Yes. Right.
And that continued on for some time. So
Right.
fantastic, fantastic history. So yeah, Imperial Stout, of course, kind of means a lot different today, and maybe that's a good dovetail into more modern times.
Yeah, so we're going to probably jump ahead from I guess we're maybe in the 70s, 1970s already, because we're talking about Guinness. So really, just
8 years.
Yeah, just 8 years later, Stout starts making an appearance again in the United States, and this is very similar to with the Pale Ale. I believe, now this is a hot take that I could easily look up. Maybe somebody can. I believe Ken Grossman's first brew was Stout. I think. A lot of people think it was Sierra Nevada Pale, but I don't. I think that came very soon after.
That feels right.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it is right. But
Exactly. That's all I need to hear. Huh. It feels right. Yeah, right? Yeah, you can Google it.
That would be news to me, but
Okay.
then again, I don't know all the...
Yeah. But you start having these microbreweries who are brewing classic English styles. We've all heard the story of these children. The baby boomers. They go away and they go to. What's up?
according to VinePair, we can confirm that.
Yeah, there you go.
The first
There you
batch of
go.
beer was stout.
Yeah, the first beer was of Sierra Nevada was a stout. So they got a taste for some of these beers that they had over there in England, and they came back and they couldn't get any because it was at the very lowest point for beer variety here in the States. It was just all the industrial lager. So they started making their own stuff, right? We talked about this with the Pale Ale, and if you've read of any of the big craft breweries, if you read their origin story, they're basically all the same. So many of them are the same anyway. And
we're all unique, beautiful snowflakes.
no, they
Chris.
are, but
Come on.
there is definitely a trend
Yes,
where
yes.
they started home brewing and they loved it and they wanted to brew stuff that they'd had and they couldn't drink, and
Yes.
and stout was definitely one of the early beers that people were brewing, in addition to pale ale and IPA, but really the English stuff, right? I mean, I do think that people forget how closely linked U.S. craft beer is with the English beer scene, because I think
Absolutely.
England really does get kind of people think of Germany and Belgium and their amazing brewing cultures and brewing histories. Here in the United States, I think like beer people, but really the stuff we drink is the English stuff. We like pale ales and we like stouts, and those are as English as it gets.
You mentioned Sam Smith's.
Yeah.
I mean, the earliest imports that I remember are like Sam Smith's, McEwen's,
Yes.
some Scottish ales, some English ales,
Yep.
English stouts. Sam Smith's has been in the United States for, that'd be a good number
Yeah.
to see when they first started coming to the United States,
Yeah.
but it's probably been some time. So
Some time, and probably I wouldn't be surprised if it was after some of these guys were making them, at least on the West Coast. But yeah, I mean, Sam Smith started coming with some of their stuff. Yeah, their oatmeal stout, which we drank. We also had one of the early ones, the Shoots stout. Because a lot of these older stouts, they weren't the Imperials, they were just the stouts.
American stout,
The American stout.
well hopped. Yeah.
And that was what I was just going to say. We had that when we drank that Obsidian. We should probably go grab another one because it's still, I think, only like 3 weeks old. It was like a week old when we were drinking it. It was amazing. It just happened to have come in like the day before, and it was a week old. And I mean,
Let's just take a moment.
Yeah.
And we need to go
yeah,
get a
yeah,
bottle
go
of
get
that. But I love that beer. To me, it's boldly hoppy. I believe it's late hopped with Northern Brewer, which gives it kind of a minty note.
Yeah.
Which gives it that kind of chocolate mint
thing.
character. It's a I don't know, 6.5% alcohol, 7, something like that.
Yeah.
It's
I don't think it's I think it's less
what
than
I
7,
think
yeah.
of like American stout. It's taking that big roasty base, beefing up the alcohol, and just hopping the hell out of it.
Yeah.
Late hopping. And I love American stouts. I'm not a huge fan of black IPA. Is kind of taking something that's somewhat
Pushes it a
similar,
little further.
but like shifting the hop
Yeah.
varietals and the hop placement around. American stout, I love it. I'm a huge fan of Obsidian, so I highly recommend. If you haven't had that beer or haven't had it in a while, and it's bottle condition too.
Yeah.
I mean, talk about a throwback that you don't
But
see
a lot of those
anymore.
throwbacks, we were talking about how many of them were hoppy. I know Expedition is incredibly hoppy. Now that's an Imperial. But Victory Storm King, that was the one by me when I was out in PA, was so hoppy.
Yeah.
So that's what we knew it as, just this super hopped up stout.
Right, and not just like bitter hopped up, but like you were saying, late edition.
Yes,
which
late
wasn't,
edition,
wasn't
hoppy,
the thing.
yeah.
for
Probably
you.
3-4 hop additions just on the hot side.
Imperial stout was probably quite bitter, right? But it was bittering additions. It wasn't like, hey, let's use these Cascades or whatever the new varietal was in these American stouts that, or Northern Brewer, and put them at the end and get some aromatics. Have these hops contribute character to this.
Yeah. Do you want to? Let's set down a couple stouts, and we'll come back in a little bit. Then we'll continue talking about the U.S. side of the history of stout. All right, we're back. We've got some stouts. We've got now Obsidian Stout. I got some Expo. I got a Storm King. We just had it sitting on the singles. I'm not sure, what that's coded for. I think it's. It might be over a
I don't
year.
think I've ever had Storm King.
Oh, really? I don't know how fresh that one is. I mean, it's still got almost a year.
We got until October on this guy.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think it's well within
We're good, baby.
Yeah. And then,
Hops, Cascade, Chinook, Centennial. Let's do it.
yeah, so they list the hops on the bottle.
Also, for our malt conversation, Pilsner malt, Vienna malt, Carafa. No roasted malt in there. I guess
Interesting.
Carafa a roasted malt? Is that technically a yeah?
Environment.
Is that a dehusked roasted malt? Is that what that is?
Yeah, they'll we use a lot of Carafa too. But yeah, it's roasted.
All right. There is
So
roasted.
having that
what-
Obsidian now, man, it's hoppy. It's hoppy and bitter. Like it uses hops in all the ways. So I think that's a great example of, this is one of those class of
that minty
88s.
thing is very there. Too.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it's that Northern Brewer. It's I love this beer. Absolutely love this beer.
Yeah, it's a classic, and it is fun for some of these old breweries to kind of go back and see what they were brewing.
It also is not something that's in like the untapped lexicon, right? Like the untapped palate lexicon. Like this style of beer, which is lower ABV for stout there, hoppy, minty, a little bit bitter, and not that it's not thin, but compared to what people perceive stout as now, it's different.
Well, I think
6.4% alcohol.
It's also like I think a lot of people should like this, but who knows? It might be the Allagash White of stouts.
No, it's a delicious. It's a
Allagash
delicious beer. So this is kind of where we're at. We're talking about the U.S. version, how this has
derivative of English, and you'd see, think of the earliest craft stouts. We mentioned oatmeal stout, so oatmeal stout, Sam Smith's was popular. I think a lot of breweries were referencing that. Of course, nitro stouts for brewers that wanted to do nitro. Guinness, huge influence there. Milk stouts, which kind of had a day, and now they're having another day in a different way in the pastry form. And then the oddball, oyster stout, which
sure
The best.
you see every now and again.
yeah. Now,
Very
go on.
interesting little thing about oyster stout. That's mostly about the calcium, right, from the shells, than it is about like any sort of meatiness or like it's.
Maybe a briny.
Yeah.
I mean, I've heard of some brewer. I've never made one myself, but I've heard of some brewers just using the liquor for kind of a briny character.
I've heard people just
Some
using
use
the
the
shells
flesh,
just
some
to
use the
get
shells.
calcium chloride in a way that before they knew they could get
Yeah.
powdered calcium chloride that creates quite a bit of mouthfeel.
Yeah. So, I mean, an oddball beer then and
Thick.
still today.
Only one C,
Yeah.
though, not two.
But on your site, just to bring it back to Beer Temple, you've got the porter stout category and then subcategories of dry/Irish, pastry, porter, and Russian Imperial Stout. That's
Yeah.
how you list yours.
Yeah, that is because that's how people shop for them.
Yeah.
That's how we have it. That's how we have them listed out. Also, what happens is we have other style. Now I'm defending the website. It's funny. If there isn't a beer that fits that style, that category drops off the site, and then it goes up again if there is a beer that is like an oatmeal stout or something like that. Yeah,
okay.
yeah. That way people aren't like clicking on it and there's nothing in
Yeah.
there. But anyway.
Just going back to designing great beer, Ray, circa 2000, at least this copy of the book, he categorized stout in 4 categories of classic, which I think like Guinness Draft, dry Irish, foreign, probably also Guinness, sweet or cream,
Yep.
and imperial. So
Yes, which I think are those are still kind of the main ones. Now they have, I guess you could probably add
Subcategory, yeah.
flavored stout or something like that. But we were kind of wondering why these early stouts were so hoppy, because we're going to have that Storm King a little bit. That's hoppy, and that Expo is going to be the hoppiest of all of them. I mean, that beer is aggressively hoppy, and that's going to be a 5-month-old beer already. That Expo, but it's still going to be quite hoppy. So
yeah, and
why?
That's a great. You and I talked about this a little bit. It's same with IPAs. It was American brewers. It was an early way to differentiate. Was beef up the alcohol and throw in more hops.
Yeah,
Right. It's more than what you had before. More.
but the stout was already such a differentiation. I don't think they needed to do it because people did not have a reference. I'm sure they knew Guinness, and that was it. I think they just liked, maybe it was, they were from the Pacific Northwest. They just liked hops. They liked to put hops in everything, maybe. I don't know. But it is something that's, I don't know, maybe we'll have to dive into and,
Yeah, you look
and
at, like,
talk to some of these people.
You look at Sierra Nevada Bigfoot. Part of the prototypical American barley wine, just like basically triple IPA. It's really, really highly hopped. Beer, and I think I don't know how long. Well, that was been around for 40 years or
around
something
forever,
like that.
yeah.
But I want to think that beer and maybe and a lot of hoppy beers in the West Coast were just kind of setting the pace of, what, no matter what the style is, we're going to chuck in a lot of hops, bump up the alcohol, take these styles kind of, and that's just been the American way of making beer for a long time.
Yeah. You were talking a little bit earlier about how we're going to talk about some of these styles and how they are kind of coming back around. But there have been ever since the Free Mash Tun Act, adjuncts in stouts, more so than many other beer styles. It seems like stout has been the style that has been adjuncted. Maybe you can talk about sour beers and fruit. Sour beers have also been really adjuncted, but stouts are definitely up there, if not at the top of the heap. And with different grains, with adding lactose, with all that sort of stuff. And in the U.S., very early on, you started to have coffee stouts, coffee porters, stuff like that. So I started looking. I don't think I wasn't really interested in finding the first example of a coffee stout, because I think that's just been a trend that's been around for a while. But easily now we're looking at 20-ish years, but it's been, I think, a lot longer than that. But even some of the big names that are still around, like Founder's Breakfast Stout, came out in. So for this, I wasn't looking at when they came out. I was looking at when they were first added to Beer Advocate or Rate Beer, which is probably a good indicator of when those beers came out.
The best place of record.
I mean, good enough.
Yeah.
Good enough for this show, anyway.
Hot take history, baby.
Exactly. So that's where I started to kind of follow it, because what I want to do now is I want to talk about where stouts are now, which are stouts are imperial and stouts are adjuncted. That's just what they are, especially if you include a barrel as an adjunct, which I know you do, Mike. You said so on this show. So, I mean,
Trapped him. Nice.
Yeah. Find
Gotcha.
a non-adjuncted non-imperial stout that isn't, from 1988, like the one we're drinking right now.
What's that night something from Allagash?
Right.
3.6 bottle cap.
North Sky. Yeah.
Yeah. North Sky.
Yeah. The Belgian stout.
Belgian's an adjunct, I guess. Yeah.
But that is still 7.5%. I mean, that's kind of getting up there. I don't know.
Gotcha.
But still, I mean, yes, they are out there. But when you talk to a modern drinker,
a thing when people were like excited, it's like it's just a 7% stout and there's nothing in it.
I know, and it's a great beer. I mean, that's an amazing beer.
And going back to the Chicago Sweet Tooth and barrel aging, of course, in imperial stout that's already fairly sweet, and adding those vanilla and coconut and caramel notes from the barrel, and big rich alcohol, which adds sweetness as well. I think when you've got the body and sweetness, and again, I'm talking about barrel aged imperial stouts, the adjuncts can play really well. We did a 5.5%, 6% stout, much lower gravity, just to play around with some adjuncts. And the first thing, and this isn't something we've done a lot with, usually it's Bourbon County or the like, it was just striking to add kind of some bold adjuncts without a big, rich, sweet base, and it just kind of falls flat. So I think the bigger, richer imperial stouts, my take on, at least my experience with these beers, is they lend themselves. You can coffee and and even adding more sweetness in the form of maple syrup or
coconut.
Fruit. Coconut fruit. There's so many complementary flavors when you talk about chocolate and building on that big dark malt bill.
And especially when you're talking about, the black patent malt was invented by a coffee roaster, right? And a lot of those, so it's very similar way of roasting these grains versus the coffee beans. You get a lot of the same flavors, a lot of the same compounds. Literally the same flavor compounds are created. So just like we were talking, Mike, with pale ale, like how did we get to, smoothie IPAs? Well, it became from these, really fruity flavors from the hops, and then they started fruiting IPAs, and then there you go. And I think, you're getting these chocolate and coffee flavors in the stout, so it would only make sense to start adding coffee to the beer.
So it starts by amplifying things that already exist in the thing you were making before.
Right.
I mean, at Pipeworks, that's the idea behind Jones Dog when we were making that beer. Add cacao nibs, add vanilla beans. To amplify those flavors, add coffee to some of it.
Same for Goose Island. I mean, 2009 was the first Intelligentsia. It was the first Bourbon County variant with Bourbon County coffee, 2009. Vanilla was 2010, and then we started kind of off to the races with fruits and all the, complementary, and then sometimes less kind of consonant and adjuncts that will take it in a new direction and oftentimes polarizing.
Right. So it's like a bolding a font, making it more intense. And then you're changing a font at some point, right? Right. And then at some point you just get to wingdings and you're
So but in the early aughts, you had they were going crazy with the stouts and the coffee and stuff like that. Oatmeal coffee stout, bourbon barrel oatmeal coffee stout, KBS. That was about as huge as it got. There were some proto beers. I don't know if you're going to call this.
Is this the origin of the pastry stout?
I don't know, man.
I think we should definitively say what is the first pastry stout to us.
To us, okay, we can say that.
Yeah.
To me, I mean, the first pastry stout to me was
I've got one in mind.
Southern Tier Creme Brulee.
100%.
And it came out in 2008. Chocolate came out in 2007, and it was like drinking Hershey's syrup.
It's very sweet, but it's doing what the same things we were just talking about, right? Where it's only adding vanilla or cacao nibs. It's not trying to like make it a Reese's cup or something like that. But the intention by the names is very obviously to be like, this is a sweet thing that will remind you of a dessert you've had.
Right.
So it's like that's the point on the curve where it goes from one thing to another.
So it's interesting though, because then the next year you have Hunapu comes out, which is that Mexican stout,
which has created its own category at this point too.
Yes. Right. Then 2 years later you had Abraxas, which was I think the next big Mexican stout, which is kind of its own. I don't know. A lot of people don't consider those to be pastry stouts, but it's definitely amplifying the KBS,
heavily adjuncted,
BCS kind of.
But now you're seeing the addition of cinnamon and sometimes chilies of some sorts, flavors that weren't already in the beer. So this is no longer bolding. This is a changing of the font, right?
Right.
This is a flavoring of the base.
Right.
Right. The first kind of like, we're not just going to try to make the base more bass. We're trying to like add treble to it.
Mm-hmm. And during this time, there was Bourbon County Coffee and Bourbon County Vanilla had come out. What year was Vanilla?
Horizon.
Was it?
Pardon?
What time? Do you remember what year Vanilla came out? Was it?
We've done Vanilla. The first one was 10. So we've
Okay.
done it. We did it 10, 14, 18.
Got it. So 2010 it was, Bourbon County Vanilla, but it wasn't Bourbon County Creme Brulee, I think some of that does, as you were saying, matter.
There is something to the marketing of it, right?
Yeah. So that to me would be the first, but it's hard to say because then, like I said, in 11 you have Abraxas. You also have Saugatuck's Neapolitan Stout came out in 2011. I mean, that beer is sweet and tastes like chocolate, vanilla, and strawberry.
And blatantly attempting to be some sort of thing that isn't just underscoring flavors, right?
And also, it's hard to say when this stuff started because brew pubs and stuff were always kind of doing these little weird one-offs and stuff like that. I was looking at some old. I was just trying to find different breweries that maybe would have done crazy stuff like that. And Dogfish Head had a brew pub only beer called Count Chocula, like way back in like forever ago.
Did it actually have Count Chocula in it?
No, it didn't though.
No, well, then
it just had a lot of chocolate. It was a big chocolate stout.
Weren't that ahead of their time?
Right,
I guess.
exactly. See, they don't realize what they really want is just they want IP theft, so they want a picture of Count Chocula on the glass.
On the teku.
And then they want
It might glow in the dark, maybe not.
Yeah, and then they want this actual cereal.
Is that a subcategory of pastry stout where you're actually using that dessert
food product,
a finished product,
throwing in a whole German chocolate cake into the mash?
The BJCP doesn't recognize it yet, but I mean, it is. It's unfortunately like a different genre of this kind of absurdism.
It's more of like an Instagram, like
I think that's what it is.
The shock value.
But
go ahead,
no, but it does. You do see how it starts to go there pretty quickly because I would say Saugatuck Neapolitan maybe a bit of an anomaly really in the trend. I don't think it was really setting too many trends. But then you have Evil Twin Biscotti Break came out 2012, and this isn't even a full year later. These are like 8 months later, 6 months later.
Zeitgeist, there's something happening,
and that has vanilla, almond. I think it's vanilla, almond, and chocolate, or maybe chocolate and almond, or something in it. And it's called Biscotti Break, and you're really starting to get close to this stuff. And the stouts are also about to become sweeter overall. I think 13 is where I think like the stouts really started to become sweeter. Again, this is kind of hot takey, but
it seemed to me it felt like it kind of a hockey stick type thing, right? Where 13, 14, and then by 16, you're at like 14 Plato finishing gravity is nothing to laugh at anymore.
Right.
It's like this is normal. If you're not doing this, you're dumb.
Well, yeah. I mean, by 13, I think the roadmap was set. I have 2013 starred because that's when, if you really want to say who made the first pastry stout, hard to say, but who went all in on it and is like, this is what we're going to be brewing, not just one, but I think you got to give it to Omnipollo. I mean, they were so in early, because in 2013 they had the Hypnopampa, which was, it says on the notes that they added over 200 pounds of marshmallow and Tahitian vanilla beans and gave it a low carb. So, like, they're saying, like, we are making this thing sweet and we're turning down the carbonation and it's just going to be sticky. Yeah. And they still make this beer. They still make this marshmallow vanilla stout to this day. And a couple years later from Omnipollo, there's a beer called Noah Pecan Mud Cake, which you had on draft. Remember that German chocolate cake stout, which tasted like effing cake. It was insane. Like, when you would pour that beer, you could smell it in the entire bar. It was insane.
Well,
but here's the note.
This is the room of how do you make things smell like that?
Right. Well, we can. But listen to this. This was the note on this one from Hennick, the brewer from Omnipollo, was, when I was 12, I dreamed of being a pastry chef. Call this creative outlet. Now, I don't know if that was added later, but that is in the Rate Beer and Beer Advocate, in the listing of, that's the description of the beer. The beer was added
First
in 2015, but I don't know if if that description was added later. But that was the first pastry note that I came across was 2015 for these guys. And then in 2017, that's when Don't Drink Beer coins the term pastry stout, and, you know,
as a joke.
Well, as kind of like a way of, I think, maybe lovingly making fun of them. I mean, he certainly got to love them in some way, because he's made a huge crowd. He's made a huge crowd based off these beers.
Yeah.
But yeah. So then by 2017, certainly by 2018, everyone. I mean, that's just what those beers are called now. They're called pastry stouts. And is that where we're at now, or is it? And it's even kind of gone beyond that, where it's like finished food products.
Yeah, there's definitely finished food products being added to stouts like that, but I don't think that that's sufficiently broken the bounds of, I mean, a pastry is a finished food product, right? So to make it taste like that, or just to, maybe it gave license to be like, let's just add it right to it. And then there's a lot of cynicism in beer production these days, and in those worlds, and that world of making that types of beer.
I think for me, it takes the fun out of it, because it's more interesting from my perspective to deconstruct the flavors and kind of build it back with sourcing from different places. I want to get the best vanilla beans and cocoa nibs and this and that, and deconstructing it and building
like the
back
cola
up.
beer, like the cola stout that you made.
Yeah, whether you liked it or hated it, you know, a lot of work went into that, and it was deconstructed and built back up onto this base of beer.
And this might be a good time to talk about, like, what I said was the elephant in the room of how these things are actually being made, and kind of go back to the free mash tun, tie that all back in, where a lot of these beers are just being made by making that very sweet stout and dumping flavorings into it, not buying raw ingredients and extracting those flavors, even if they are finished Portillo's cake or whatever. Just buying birthday cake flavoring or something like that and adding it to your finished beer, which you can debate about the legitimacy of or whatnot, but that's a lot of where this style of production is at. You throw the cake in the mash for the gram, and then you add your cake flavoring in the bright tank, and then you needs 22 more milligrams of cake flavoring, and you dump more into it.
Because that allows you to really tap into that collective flavor nostalgia, because you can oftentimes use the exact same flavor that your favorite dessert uses to to bring that aroma profile together. You can get those same flavors if you shop around.
Something we've
and
talked
if
about.
if that flavor nostalgia is really what you're trying to tap into, and a lot of breweries are, let's be honest, like that's going to be the quickest way and the easiest way to do it.
That's also something we've talked about on the show about the people's palates being in the matrix to some point, where like you're not tasting the flavor of a strawberry. And the classic example you said, not tasting the flavor of strawberry. You want the flavor of strawberry quick.
Yeah.
Right. And like you're saying, you can dial up the right flavor house or the right extract provider, and you get exactly the same thing that goes into whatever the thing is that you wanted to recreate. And on some level, like, it's kind of interesting to be like, why wouldn't you do it at some point? And then there's, because it's not that. I mean, as
I
a
guess not interesting to
creator,
you.
it's not interesting to me. Like,
There was a great article. I'll have to look into it now. But there was a great article. I want to say Good Beer Hunting sometime in the last year. You guys may have read this on flavorings, and it referenced how breweries are using flavorings more, but the
Go through the bottle shop.
Breweries are using flavorings more, but like the flavors themselves, oftentimes from these flavor houses, are so old. Like they go back in a catalog so long ago, like banana, for instance. The flavor that a lot of people associate with banana from a flavor perspective goes back to a period when a different varietal banana had its heyday. That had a lot more of that isoamyl acetate that was present in the actual banana than is in the common banana these days. Yeah. So referencing a flavor, again, depends on your flavor house, and a lot of them are quite old. I'll have to find this article now. I think it was Good Beer Hunting, but did you guys remember seeing this? Just talking about flavors.
I've heard about it, yeah.
Great article.
Yeah, absolutely.
Reminder to look it up. But so flavors, oftentimes in these flavor houses, are really, really old, but they're referencing kind of a collective flavor of back when like a lot of these tropical fruits were not commonly available.
Right.
So the flavor, I guess the point I'm trying to make is, oftentimes back in the day, people knew the aroma of the flavor before they knew the aroma of the actual thing it was trying to reference.
Right.
They knew the natural flavor or artificial flavor of banana before they smelled a banana themselves.
Right, banana
or pineapple.
runs existed before
watermelon
bananas were widely available.
So it was like the cart before the horse, or the tail wagging the dog. Or,
yeah. It's a podcast called, not to plug other podcasts, but Gastropod that has an episode about that, specifically about banana, where there was like...
Which was huge back in the day. A lot of stuff was flavored with banana. I guess the original Twinkie was banana flavored. You had banana moon pies. You have
Runts.
Circus peanuts. Apparently,
Those are banana flavored?
They're supposed to be banana flavored. Yeah,
supposed to be. Is a hilarious qualifier there.
Yeah. But but it was in that heyday. But all those things, I don't think Runts came later, but or from the 50s or something like that. And I think there was a different banana. My dad he's crazy. He talks about how he doesn't like bananas because the seeds get stuck in his teeth, and we always make fun of him because bananas don't have
I've
seeds.
Had seeds since the 70s, Dad.
Right, but
Villanova was scoring the lowest point total since Baylor this year.
Yeah, since this year when I was there, yes. Yeah. But I then, like, decades later was reading about, bananas used to have seeds in them, and I was like, oh, I guess he did get banana seeds stuck in his teeth when he was a kid and hated it.
Banally dystopian about a fruit not having seeds. Like that's some Brave New World style. Like,
right.
This fruit should have seeds. What's going on there? That's an aside for a different show.
For a different show. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, the flavor nostalgia, I've never heard it put that way, Mike, but I think you're absolutely right. That's what it is. It's flavor nostalgia, and that's the big thing now.
That's what I call it. I don't know if that's,
I think it's
if
a
I
great
picked
term.
that up somewhere, or it's either probably some sort of subconscious theft, but that's what I think of when and of course we're well a part of it. I say we, Goose Island, in the stuff that we're doing, and a lot of the beers that we've been doing, certainly in the Bourbon County range, are tapping into a flavor nostalgia. And quite honestly, we've used natural flavors a lot more. We never used to use them up until a few years ago, but it's just another tool in the toolbox now. And we try to be really considerate, and I think that just putting that brewer's hat back on again, Mike, just using flavors in combination with adjuncts, like building up both and not just leaning heavily on flavors, but using, like, I'll give you an example. 2020 proprietors had a lot of pistachios in it, 15 pounds per barrel. But pistachios and all nuts is whenever we used them as it's an insane amount. Whenever we use nuts, they're very volatile. That the flavor active compounds, probably based in the oils that we're extracting, very volatile. Coconut's the same way, and they fade really quickly. So we knew, like, okay, we want this beer to maintain a profile. Then this pistachio is part of this profile. We want to. It's a Bourbon County brand. It's not a something that we want to fall out of profile, within a couple of months. So we backed it with a really light pistachio natural flavor, so that when the pistachios, as we predicted, the actual pistachios faded away, what you were left with was still some degree of balance left behind. You wouldn't necessarily know it right away with fresh, but it's one of the tools we use to help maintain it. When we talk about best by date and stuff like that, it's, we don't expect that the beer will all of a sudden go bad. It's just, it's drifted. When you're using 3, 4, 5 adjuncts and you want this beer to taste good after 2 years, how do you predict how they're all going to still, different things fade at different rates. Some things, cinnamon, just holds on forever.
Whereas get more intense.
Yeah. Whereas other, ingredients fade, again, nuts, really fade quickly. So how do you maintain a profile?
Well, and this is a similar thread to pale ale being technology, or hops that taste like mangoes being like a crazy new technology you couldn't use before. Like, there weren't flavorings in 1860 when they were making stout, right? You couldn't just dial up this exact flavor, and if there was, they'd probably be like, well, hell yes, let's use that.
Right.
They used a lot of caramelized sugar. I know that.
Right, and which is another like kind of created flavor, right? But it's like I have my own personal opinions about what I would want to do with it, but I have no moral judgments of people that are actually using them, and I get why, and there are very legitimate reasons.
Well, just like any ingredient, I think there's a thoughtful approach, and then there's maybe a less thoughtful, just kind of let's just chuck it in approach.
Right.
So,
and if it's the only thing you're doing to that beer, that's probably different than we used all these natural ingredients and then underscored it. So all little shades of different usages.
So I was almost going to say, where do we think stout is going? But I'm going to change it a little bit. Like, where are some places that maybe stout could go? Like, just some hypothetical, because it can't keep going in this direction.
I always say that, and it always does, right? I don't know. We're always like, no, it's going to revert back to classic styles.
No, I think hazy's starting to take a step back. I think they're starting to dry out a little bit. A lot of them. I don't think they're as sweet and stuff like that. So I think the hazy stuff is starting to, come back a little bit more into balance. So I think stout definitely could as well.
I think there's a good argument to be made that as the bulk craft beer consumer, like kind of the guy who drinks a good amount of craft beer, wants less exploration, that things will actually add back to beers that taste like what stout tasted like. Mm-hmm. And excellent examples of it, maybe extreme versions of those, but the banana daiquiri pastry stout isn't going to be the end-all be-all of stout. Mm-hmm. So I guess that belies what I just said. But
do you think you could see a day where Obsidian Stout is being made anew by breweries that didn't open in the 80s?
So depends on I could definitely see this being like as ascendant as Black IPA was, thanks to Doug Valecki a couple of years ago. Shout out Doug. Mm-hmm. But it depends on how you look at it, right? Are you looking at a lot of breweries are making these and they're making money making these? Or are you looking at it like, this is the hottest thing on Untappd. This is what people are putting up on Instagram. Like, we're running in two parallel worlds here. Mm-hmm. Where people probably would enjoy drinking this Obsidian Stout greatly, but they're going to rate it like Allagash White. It's not thick. It's not sweet. It doesn't taste like anything they had as a child.
And it's bitter. Yeah. I think the bitterness, if we go back to the kind of imperial beer wars of 15 years ago, where everything was high gravity, and to a certain degree, IPA, stouts, whatever, a lot of residual sweetness, but they were really bitter. And again, we talk about this being a throwback. But to our palates, it didn't at the time. It didn't seem crazy. Maybe you just have one and be like feel fatigued, and you didn't quite know why. But you didn't really know any difference.
Sure.
But bitterness has been scrubbed out of almost all beer making these days, unfortunately, because I think it's got a place, and that's the element that's missing. Is we've got sweetness has been around. Sweetness hasn't really kind of come and gone. It's just it was balanced by bitterness for a good long time, and now the bitterness has really faded away. And I think, that just might be how it is. It's certainly how it is now. I have a hard time looking ahead and seeing bitterness really coming back in a big way.
Not like the heyday of the West Coast IPA and stuff. Those huge, bitter, palate wrecking.
Well, like this
beers.
Obsidian,
right?
I
Or
love
even
this
that.
beer. I hope that as craft beer, I think is really trying to open its doors to a wider audience and being more inclusive. They want people to come in and drink things that are referencing non-beers, and again, which I think why juicy beers really appeal, because and this flavor nostalgia really appeals because you can kind of tap into a much wider audience of people that are bringing a non-beer experience to something that tastes like beer. I had something from a East Coast brewery, a can that called itself a fruited Berliner, but honestly, it was just hard juice.
Sure.
And there's nothing Berliner Weiss about this.
Yet?
It was nothing, but it called itself a Berliner Weiss, which I thought was, interesting. So it was hard juice, and again, for that it tasted good, but I had a hard time, putting any type of Berliner Weiss expression on it.
Exactly.
So I think it's hard to look ahead. I think I would love to think that we're going to see an era where maybe the adjuncts go away and we get back to just malt and hops again and yeast expression. I would love to see that.
I think when we look to the future, it's unfortunately kind of like narrowing lanes for all of these things, right? There will be all of the things will still probably exist in smaller proportion, I would imagine. I mean, you guys have done a great job of championing single barrel expressions of like the Bourbon County program, which wasn't a thing 4 years ago, and now it's one of the more sought after versions of it. So, I mean, people have responded to that. So, I can't imagine it becoming more adjunct laden than it has been in the last few years.
imagine.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
It's really hard to think of a way it could be. I mean, going back to some of these beers are just straight flavorings added to stouts. Like, it can't become more adjunct
And be a
of
stout.
truth,
And still be a stout.
right.
It
Still
just-
still be a beer. Like
It has to just become like
old man
flavored juice or
cloud shit. But
it becomes a flavored malt beverage at that point. I mean,
Right.
it's no longer a stout. But if we're talking about where does stout go, stout's not going anywhere. It's still wildly popular.
I mean,
Well, Guinness Stout, right?
Yeah.
So like the
Right.
stout, like dry,
yeah.
to some, I love the beer, but a lot of craft people, it's too bland of a beer. We talked about it, in our pre-show about how it's the one global beer and brewery, that's not lager. It's
Yeah.
Guinness Stout.
The only one.
This
And
legacy
it's so
brewery,
old.
It's
It's amazing. I
Yeah.
mean, it's an amazing beer. It's an amazing brewery. That how it's this old 4% Irish stout that is still all over the damn place. It's all over the darn world.
more breweries than any individual brewing facility.
And it's far from
Yeah.
pastry as you can get, and that beer hasn't changed at all.
Yeah.
So it's another end of the spectrum from imperial and barrel aged and pastry.
Well, you also see when a pendulum swings so far into the pastry world, the producers of it, like, well, we went there, and then now it's like it's extreme to be not that extreme. Like, we're making, like, you might see.
That's exactly
things
right,
where it's
yeah.
like here's our Night Stalker, or our I don't know, expedition, where it's
Yeah.
like it's just we didn't put anything in it. It's like, check out how crazy how big our balls are. We didn't even put peanut butter in this one.
Well,
Right,
because
exactly.
when the extreme has been the norm for so long, then I think this is the point you're trying to make.
Right.
A lot of people haven't had the norm. The people that have just started, their entry point was pastry, maybe. Like entry point into craft beer was hazies and pastry stout, which is realistic to think somebody getting into craft beer in the last few years. That's all they really
You know what's reminding me of, Mike?
They never had a brown ale. They never had a straight up oatmeal stout
Yeah.
or an English bitter.
It reminds me exactly of what you just said a few minutes ago about how, before a lot of these fruits were prevalent, maybe some of their first times that they've ever had this flavor was with an extract or through a candy or something like that. And it's funny, a lot of times, I think now the first time people have had a lot of these styles are probably when they're flavored, heavily flavored. Certainly stouts.
Right, and the way it presents, like the way if you're out in the field, is like, oh, that was really drinkable. I really liked that. Like, you don't see it. It wasn't 5 stars on tap, but like I'll get another one of those. Right, that like it's this like it doesn't need to be as intense because I want to have 2 beers. I don't want to like go to a bottle share and have a couple ounces of 12 things.
Yeah.
And be
I never have the same beer twice, but I had 3 of these, 2 bottle caps.
Yeah, right.
Like one of those.
Wasn't thick.
Right. Drank it all night. It was great. Exactly what I was looking for. 2 bottle caps.
Right.
Not enough peanut butter.
Right. But then we also remember like what are ratings, right? There's bottle caps of things you're trying to show your friends that you like,
Right.
and then there's the voting with your wallet of buying 3 of something.
Sure. Exactly. I think we've done it, guys. I think
We made it.
Yeah. Is there anything else? Is there anything we missed? I think there's nothing about stout that no stone was left.
If you think we missed something, send us an email.
Yeah.
Something you have a question about stouts, send us an email or a letter.
Yeah. What's the definitive pastry stout to you guys? If
What
not
was
the
the
first.
first? What was the
first?
first?
Or definitive
Yeah.
for you? That's the other thing. Is there a definitive pastry stout to you, for you, Mike and Mike? There isn't for me, I don't think.
And I don't know. I don't engage with it enough to have an opinion like that.
Yeah, I don't really have one that I would say.
I mean, I would have to. The most formative for me,
if you're
is
shooting
Jones
it into
Dog,
outer space for like alien race to understand the pastry stout, the brewing culture, which pastry stout would you put in there?
First of all, we should not fund this project.
Too late. It's already been
some
it's already
sort
been
of
done.
Other half Thai banana coconut peanut butter monstrosity in a Magnum.
Oh yes, has to be in a large format.
Yeah,
of course.
Yeah, they're harder to get, so they're better.
Not like barrel aged Hangy or something like that from Three Floyds.
I mean, we're not
The hype lord.
I think that like a Thai banana other half is probably as hyped up as a barrel aged Hangy, but I don't really know. I'm not paying attention.
What if that's what we give them? That's like the alien race that we shoot at. Like, give this, trade this with your fellow
like,
aliens.
Does your planet
Flip
have
this.
Does your planet have resources that we can mine, and we send them a barrel aged Hangy, and they're like, what? Oh fuck!
No, you're supposed to flip it.
Run away!
You're supposed to flip it.
Yeah,
man.
yeah.
We're helping you.
You're supposed to trade this
You're
for
welcome.
bourbon, and then you can trade the bourbon for money.
Yeah.
Except no one actually gets the money for the bourbon, so then your wife's mad at you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Sorry, guys. That might.
Yeah. So I guess
got dark at
the
the
proto to me, the proto would have to be Southern Tier for the pastry,
I have to agree.
and I think the first pastry stout brewery would have to be Omni out of Sweden is what I would say. So, but more importantly, some pretty cool stuff about the history of stout that I hope you found enjoyable.
It's a very
Like,
nice. This is why we can't have nice things kind of evolution there.
No,
We just turn into peanut butter cups.
no, it'll come back. It'll come back.
Sure.
All right. Well, thanks, Mike, for doing all this research. It was amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, hopefully it wasn't too much spewing of just random facts. And ultimately, I think, as we talked about, there's a lot of references that are contemporary that really go back a couple hundred years, whether it's sweet profiles or imperial. It's like this thing that we see imperial all the time, but it's a hundreds of year old term. But more than anything, just fun to talk with you guys, talk about beer, drink some beer. So
Yeah, man.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Likewise. And then we're back next week. I think we've got a round table due.
Got kind of like a specific round table is what's
Yes.
scheduled about
Gonna talk
social
about-
media's impact on beer and how to use
Zero.
social media. Yeah,
All right,
no impact.
on to the next episode.
Yeah.
Social
Did
media.
I get invited to that one?
No,
Just
I don't.
kidding. Just
Yeah,
kidding.
yeah.
You won't find me on social media, so I would not be a good guest.
Lucky you.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll be there. But hey, guys, reach out to us. Look in the show notes for all that stuff. I'll also link to
Find
that
video.
That video.
If we can find it.
Yeah, of the
We
the
won't.
Belfast.
1973 Guinness
All right.
Porter.
Thanks, guys. See you next week. So long.
Remember this is what we wanted. Remember this is what we said. To never be heard or seen from again, 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 again. Remember this is what we wanted. Remember this is what we said. To never be heard or seen from again, 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 again. Remember this is what we wanted. Remember this is what we said. To never be heard or seen from again, again,